Okay, Herle Burlyites, I'm going to ask a question that doesn't need to be asked, but please indulge me because I'm coming to a point. Could you live without the internet? Could you live without the instant access to critical information, such as your bank balance? Or in my case, ignoring looking at your bank balance for fear of what it might say? Or to listen to your favorite political podcast and then tweet complimentary things about the host's haircut? That would be nice. But there are so many Canadians who just cannot afford the internet access they need to live life on an equal footing without help. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and their Internet for Good program offers more than 200,000 low-income Canadian families access to low-cost, subsidized high-speed internet and a computer, as well as training and tools they need to participate safely in our digital world. TELUS Internet for Good ensures parents can stay connected to their support networks, digital learning opportunities, and job opportunities, while kids and youth can learn digital literacy skills. And it's just one part of TELUS's All Connected for Good program, which bridges the digital divide and helps ensure that all Canadians, regardless of their location or circumstances, have access to the technology and resources they need to navigate the digital world with confidence. To learn more, go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca. All right, it's David Herle here, and welcome to the Herle Burly. We're back this week with our political panelists, the ever-insightful, highly entertaining Jenni, Byrne, and Scott Reid, both of them former campaign strategists and campaign leaders. Jenni for the Conservatives, and some may remember Scott as a Liberal in the past. You know them.
Or the guy that lives behind the liquor store in the bushes.
You know them, you love them, and if for some reason you hate them, they know exactly where you live because they've seen the voter databases. Before we dive in today, I have to tell you how grateful I am that many of you are taking the time to rate and review the show. Our rating is currently 4.9 out of 5, so there's a tenth of a point for room for growth here. Thanks for spurring us on with a little criticism. And here are some of your reviews. Cam Buddy F writes, if you like intelligent opinions coupled with the odd expletive, this is the show. Thank you, Cam Buddy F. Dinksog says, the Herle Burly is 6 rum and cokes out of 5. I like your math, Dinksog. And V. Corch writes, I like their analysis and it's very entertaining, but the swearing isn't as funny as they seem to think it is. Cool it, guys. So there's a difference of opinion on the swearing. Let's tone it down that shit a little bit this week.
Fuck that guy.
All right, fuck that guy. All right, let's get at this thing. There was something important happen in politics this week. All of the premiers from Canada and the provinces and territories got together, and they met yesterday in the great city of Mississauga. And at the end of it, Jenni, what happened?
Well, the net result, surprise, surprise, it seems that all the premiers are in agreement that they need more money for healthcare transfers. Right. I guess the ability to opt out of a national pharmacare program. But in the communique, there were certain things that were noticeably missing, which shows that there is obviously not consensus on issues like pipelines. There's no mention of pipelines, and there was no mention of Bill 21. So I think that was interesting as well. They all got to go home with a branded, personalized Toronto Maple Leafs jersey, to which I would wish for, 10 million moths to come and come and eat it.
Well, I'm sure that is what is going to happen to most of those jerseys.
Yes.
Yeah. Scott, what'd you think yesterday?
Well, I obviously didn't like the jersey thing. Why not just give everybody a Mike Babcock bobblehead and say, here, enjoy, welcome to Ontario.
What about the Bab socks?
The Bab socks, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Bab socks are taking on a different mening the more we learn about Mr. Babcock, right?
There's a surplus of them in a warehouse somewhere, probably in Mississauga. Obviously, I mean, the first and most fundamental takeaway is, oh, golly, the premiers were able to come together, find consensus on the fact that Ottawa's got all the money and they fucking want it. So that's no big shocker. And there were some stuff that was absent. They obviously just steered clear of controversial issues where they're divided, which, again, is probably predictable and understandable. It is a little bit frustrating when you hear political leaders, including some of those premiers, say the country's never been more divided, and then they basically skip past those issues of division. There is not a single mention of the phrase climate change in the entire communique. It's a puzzling thing. So,
I note they're not taking on the Prime Minister's challenge to try to work out equalization either.
No. In fact, and I think this is the most interesting aspect of it. It's where I was driving to. They bailed on equalization where any honest or thoughtful discussion of the formula will take you into winners and losers. And instead they moved to something called the Fiscal Stabilization Fund, which most people have probably never heard of. Even people that are really well versed in federal provincial relations probably never. And it's basically just a fire alarm fund, right? Like, let's pull the fire alarm and let's get cash. And I actually think it's a helpful thing. I think it charts a course for the feds, and they say, okay, so this is a tool that they put on the table, and this is obviously something that we can use to ameliorate tensions. So it's helpful that it's positioned there, but there's no substitute, in my view, for fundamentally addressing the fiscal arrangement stuff, and it goes beyond the emergency-ishness of the stabilization fund, and you got to deal with equalization, and then you got to get into divisions of views. So I'm not shocked that the premiers avoided divisive issues, but those divisive issues are going to have to be confronted sooner or later.
And I think they will. I think
and by them too.
Well, I think the purpose of this meeting, to Scott's point, was to at least come to consensus as to what they agree on. So they agree they need more money for healthcare. Some provinces want pharmacare, some do not. So I think as we see what happens with the Liberals and their one-on-one approach with different premiers, especially ministers or premiers Kenney and Moe, it will be very interesting. I was in Alberta for the United Conservative Party party convention, and Premier Kenney, Jason, spoke in his speech about very productive first step meetings with Chrystia Freeland. He said it was very good, and he's very excited about that. There was a lot of interest in their panel on the Fair Deal. So this is the committee that's looking at a provincial pension as opposed to CPP, provincial police force, provincial provincial tax collection. And I think the reason they're looking at this is the equalization formula is very understandable and a very high awareness for Albertans. They feel very unhappy with this. They know they've given more money, but at the end of the day, it's not going to change. You need 7 provinces, and Quebec being one of them. So I think that's why you're seeing, at least at this point, some form of consensus, because Premier Kenney is pragmatic enough to know there's actually not a lot that can change in equalization right now.
That's why I keep coming back, and I sound like a policy wank for a switch. It's why I keep coming back to the precedent of the Atlantic Accord, like a side deal.
People who like policy call them policy wonks. People who don't like policy call them policy wanks.
Right. And I'll return to my. And on that point, I'll return to my characterization of myself as a policy wank. But that the Atlantic Accord precedent, so that you do something that operates as a complement to the existing equalization formula. Although I do think there's still some tinkering to be done under the hood of the formula. I think, though, the most interesting political question going forward, actually, that's on the table now, is about pharmacare. Like, I think we now ask ourselves, oh, wait a second, is the most fundamental consequence of going to minority that Trudeau is going to lose his pharmacare program? Is he not going to be able to put that through? Or will we find out that ultimately he will cut a check that's as big as all outdoors in order to secure pharmacare? Because to me, that's the obvious implication. They're not going to accept it unless it comes with a chest full of treasure. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, we did see major social programs in the 1960s come into being in a minority circumstance. But boy, oh boy, it sure feels like that thing's being fatted up for the kill.
But of course they'll be able to get their national pharmacare program. This is the beauty of if you're sitting there as Justin Trudeau in his prime minister's office, the beauty is you're going to get whatever you want. You have enough votes on either side. You can push through a pipeline. You can have a national pharmacare program just by the sheer side of the of the votes. You have 121 on the Conservatives. You have 60 some on the.
I'm not talking about the
You
federal
can get it through
parliament.
the House of Commons, but the English media focused largely on Ford and the jerseys,
Yes.
and then on Kenney and Moe.
Yes.
But I think the most important person around that table is Legault.
Yeah.
For the feds, for sure, he's the most important person around the table, and he is the roadblock, really, to national pharmacare.
Well, but the provinces in their communique asked for an opt-out clause. So,
But you have an opt-out clause that everyone invokes, and you got no goddamn program, right?
Right.
So,
well, then, but then you've got a policy that obviously people don't want.
Well, that those people don't want. I'm not certain at all that people and the public don't want it. And I think if you're Trudeau, you say to yourself, how much do I feel that this is actually a fundamental tenet of my legacy, something that I am committed to doing, altering and adding to the social program architecture of the country. And I think we now know that this is going to be an interesting debate for the next 18 months, because I think there's a deal on all this stuff where you write a big check and you do some arrangements on fiscal stuff, and you abandon pharmacare. And that's one of the prices of peace. Or there's a deal where you say, no, I'm going to fight on that ground, and I'm going to cost the Treasury more. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch to see how that unfolds.
I don't think they agreed on anything particularly meaningful for going forward, as we've been discussing. But was there a tonal difference there that we were supposed to pick up on?
I don't think
there wasn't a lot of Fed bashing.
No, I don't think they want to. I think that they genuinely wanted to get together, even if it was just to show that they're united or they're discussing. I think it's going to come down to the one-on-one meetings with the Prime Minister and Chrystia Freeland as well, with the premiers. You know, as we were saying, the communique left out two big things that were huge topics in the last election. Bill 21, the religious symbols ban in Quebec, and pipelines. So those were two major issues that we talked about, or the parties talked about. Bill 21 dominated the first English language debate. So they were showing that they're willing to have consensus now, but we'll see how long that lasts.
Right. If you were still in the PMO,
yes,
say Mr. Harper's PMO, right? How preoccupied would you have been with the Premier's meeting? Would that be something that was really important to you? You paid a lot of attention to it. You tried to maybe direct it in a certain way, and the outcome's going to matter to you? Or is it just, is it show? Is it drama?
I think that we obviously would have paid attention to it. We would have seen what was coming out, but our approach was different than yours. We didn't have First Ministers meetings. The Prime Minister spoke on a very regular basis with all of the premiers. When he traveled around, he met with them regularly. So although we would pay attention, it's to our point. We're talking about nothing really came out of this meeting. So what can the Prime Minister's office really do? They've got the communique. I'm sure there's people in the office that have spoken to their counterparts in the premier's offices, but you know, it seemed to be a meeting more, I'm not going to say for show, but it seemed to be a meeting just to say, hey, we all want to at least work together on the surface right now. The ball now is in the Fed's court.
Right. Can't have been very deliberate if it was only 3 hours long.
No.
Scott,
can I throw out one thing? No, one thing. I don't think if Stephen Harper was still Prime Minister in this circumstance, that he would have the luxury of conducting Fed-Prov relations in the way that you just described. I think one of the interesting implications that's suddenly upon us, and no one's debated it, no one's discussed it, is just suddenly become a fundamental reality, and the meeting yesterday highlights it. We are back in the era of executive federalism. I mean, that's the only way we're actually going to move some of these issues forward. It probably is a consequence of some of these divisions and some of the regional tensions that, you know, the premiers are looking for consensus within one another. They're looking for, the Kenneys and the Moes are looking for people to backstop them. And I think that's going to become the mechanism. You're going to end up in a situation a la Pierre Trudeau, a la Brian Mulroney, a la Paul Martin, where eventually all these people are going to get locked up in a room. It's going to be messy. They're going to get sweated. They're going to get pressured, and something's going to break one way or another. And
who's
so
the upper hand right now
executive
between the federal government and the provinces?
I don't know.
The Feds always have the upper hand if they're willing to write a check as big as fucking anything. The Feds always have they have the Treasury, and they can bring people around and on side by virtue of the pen that strokes the check. Okay,
will you open this up for us a bit? Because you were part of a marathon meeting, FedProv meeting between the Prime Minister and the Premier's territorial leaders about healthcare spending.
Yeah.
It's quite legendary in the way that it went down. I don't think many FedProv meetings have gone down like that one did. But nonetheless, you saw enough of those premiers behind closed doors. Do they drop all this rhetoric when they get there? And is there do they show a different face? Is there a different kind of discussion? Behind closed doors, how do these FedProv meetings go down?
So what you're referring to is the 2004 Health Accord And we had a couple of them. We also had one on equalization, which was because it followed the health accord. It was a little less intense. But, it was a 3-day meeting. And day one of those meetings was supposed to be a dinner meeting at 24 Sussex, which basically fundamentally lasted all night long. It kind of became a sleepover for almost all the premiers. Ralph Klein, who knows what was going on, whether he's being politically intransigent or as usual, like, sorry, I had to go to the casino and switch back Rye and Coke. He didn't really show much, came late, left early. Danny Williams, who, a lot of us don't remember Danny Williams. I know you and Ralph talked about him on the podcast the other day. A capital P prick, if ever one lived.
Oh my goodness.
All right?
Oh my goodness, something we can agree on.
Oh, and remember the way he talked about Harper? I mean, he takes down the flag, all right, over the Atlantic Accord. I'll tell you a story about Danny Williams. He's coming to Ottawa, so I phone, and obviously tensions are high, so I make a point of calling his office in advance and saying to his comms director, hey, media are going to be asking about what's the play going to be, how are we going to do it? So my suggestion is I'm not going to ramp up expectations, not going to put a bunch of things on the table. I'm going to play nice. I'm just going to say, look, you know what? This is really a day for discussions. We don't necessarily expect anything specific to come out of it. It's going to be a good set of meetings. We're looking forward to constructive construction. She's like, yep. Next day, I wake up next morning, people, and this is what I say to the Globe and Mail, people are going bananas because in Newfoundland, Danny Williams is going on VOCM and saying, the fucking Prime Minister's office is saying nothing's going to come of this meeting, that it's a waste of time. Why am I even going to goddamn Ottawa if this meeting won't have any outcomes? And when I call his office to go, I thought we had prepared a script on this and we had an agreement. It was kind of like, there was kind of like awkwardness and like not really like a confessing, but more or less kind of like, hey man, like who's going to stop him, right? Like he is going to say what he's going to say. So, anyway, and I couldn't fight back because I couldn't be seen in a open fist fight with Danny Williams, although I found myself in one. Yeah. So he refuses to come to the meeting, and he's so your question about what are they like behind the scenes as opposed to in front of the camera. So Danny Williams is exactly the same behind the scenes as he was in front of the cameras. An intransigent, insufferable son of a bitch. Okay, So fuck him, and he was of no use to us. So we just had to sweep him along. But
he'll be carrying around something called Muskrat Falls for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think the history has declared itself well. And he used to call Prime Minister Harper Steve, and he takes the flag down. I mean, these are things.
In the 2008 campaign, he would actually at campaign events when this was the ABC, the Anyone But Conservative campaign that he waged. He himself, we would get reports. He would drive around and write down the license plates of people at Conservative campaign offices or at Conservative events because he wanted to enact retribution. He wanted to make sure they lost their jobs, publicly called them out on radio, like just people that were participating in the democratic process.
Through and through shit. But he was what he was. There were a number of premiers, especially in that marathon dinner meeting, which lasted all night. And the reason it lasted all night is that we got into some substantive discussions. And so we were starting to see, well, can we make some movement on this stuff? And what can we do here and there and trying to prepare the ground? And I think we ended up with about 8 of the premiers or 9 of the premiers and territorial leaders staying a good chunk of the night, like into 2, 3 in the morning. We're pounding through stuff. And a number of the premiers really emerged as very constructive behind the scenes. Like Gordon Campbell was really committed to trying to play a constructive role. Wasn't trying to grandstand. Was really doing his best to try to say to other premiers, guys, we know we're going to wrestle for money. We know we're going to wrestle over what's the price of that money. But let's try to move it along on those lines as opposed to just like yelling ourselves into corners that we can't walk out of. And Bernard Lord was I'd say even more constructive in that he wanted to play a genuinely active agent role in trying to find points of consensus. So, behind the scenes, you get all kinds of craziness. I remember walking out in the back and it was cold. It was February and we're walking out back on the lawn overlooking the Ottawa River, with Dalton McGuinty and his senior advisors and chit-chatting. And they were no princes to us either, to be clear. It wasn't like there was like, oh, okay, federal cousins. No, none of that. They were rolling as hard as they could. But, so you had a bunch of weird, intimate moments as a consequence of being locked up like that. And I remember at the time thinking about reading articles and stories from the Mulrooney era of executive federalism. And when, Mulroney himself tried to provoke that atmosphere, it looks messy from the outside. It looks like it's just a barnyard and people are locked up and they're missing deadlines and they're in there all night. But Mulroney's thesis always was, well, this is a labor negotiation, and that's what you do. You lock people up and you force them until you find out what the real bottom lines are, and then you work backwards. But you only do that when people are fatigued, tired, pissed off, screaming, crying, yelling, and smiling. And that can only happen after hours of exhausting work.
Speaking of exhausting work, that's it for the Premier's meeting. We're going to break now for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we will be talking about the situation with the Conservative leadership. So, I myself am a rootless vagabond who has no real home or community, but Ontario realtors live and breathe their communities. They're connected to the people, places, and things that make their neighborhoods tick. But why do they do it? That's easy. Building stronger communities is part of their DNA. It's the people and places that drive them to be civic leaders, ambassadors, and builders. The Ontario Real Estate Association is proud to support Ontario's 80,000 realtors and all they do to build stronger communities. Go to realtorscareontario.ca to learn more. Okay, so
I got a realtor.
I have never had a realtor. Terry bought our house. I had never seen it.
Two cousins.
Really?
From Forest Hill Real Estate. She's a crackerjack, man. All those people are.
I put together a church league basketball team in Regina when I was in grade 8, and I went and I got the biggest business person I could imagine, which
Did
was
you play in Jesuit robes?
Frances Olson Realty in Regina was the big realtor, and I went to her personally, and she agreed to sponsor the team, and they bought the uniforms. And on our first day, when we show up in the dressing room, I had a revolt on my hands among the players because they had put the slogan of the real estate company on the back of the jerseys, and the slogan was "Call an Olsen girl."
That's
so
awesome.
neither the players nor the parents were all that happy with the uniforms. But that's my realtor story. And thank you, Frances Olson, for sponsoring the Crusaders basketball team. When I got involved in politics, one of the first major skirmishes that I was involved in was in 1986, after John Turner had become elected leader in 1984 and then lost the 1984 election. There was an automatic leadership review vote coming up in 1986, and the hard cadre of Chrétien supporters were ready to take Mr. Turner down. A lot of Mr. Trudeau, the seniors, people who had supported Turner the first go-around, were now against him and wanted to take him out as leader. And that was a massive internal fight, organizational at the riding level, that had a defining impact on the Liberal Party for years afterwards. So these things are big, they're momentous, and they're incredibly internally disruptive. But they can, at times, be necessary. So, Jenni, you were out at the United Conservative Party convention in Alberta.
I was. It was a great time.
You were just referring to the speech Premier Kenney gave, but Andrew Scheer also spoke at that meeting.
He did.
And he obviously did not persuade you because you have come out in favor of a leadership convention. So would you like to walk us through your thinking about that?
Well, my thinking on this is I think there's only one question that Conservatives are asking right now, and that's if Andrew can win the next election. Can he beat Justin Trudeau? It's really the only purpose of a political party. We elect leaders, we set policies, we campaign on those policies, and then we get into government and implement them. It's in a nutshell, that's in essence what a political party does. And where I have come personally, and where I know a lot of other Conservatives have come, is since the election, there's been no indication, and the election results, there's been no indication that Andrew can do that. And to your point, I think the next 5 months could be very divisive and very distracting for our party, and therefore, so that distraction does not continue, because it's not going away. It's going to dominate at least the chattering class within the Conservative Party giving Trudeau a free ride, it would be better to start whatever leadership process there is now, as opposed to go through 5 months of infighting to then start it in April. We're in a minority situation. We might not have a lot of time.
Right. Before you jump in, Scott, I just want to ask Jenny one follow-up to that, which is the conventions that have the leadership reviews that have gone full to convention, like Joe Clark in 82 and 83, like John Turner in 86.
Stephen Harper in 2005.
Okay, right. The contested ones have been about, there was never any question that Joe Clark was going to win a majority of the delegates to the leadership review, and there was never any question that John Turner was going to win a majority of delegates to the leadership review. The question was, would the opposition be significant enough to show that they didn't have a hold on the party? So the objective was to get, say, 40% of the people to vote for a leadership review and force the leader to take that and then step down. You seem to believe this is more one-sided than that, and therefore there's no point to going to a convention. Like, this isn't a question of whether Scheer gets 65% or 75%. There's not that much support for Andrew Scheer. Is that right?
Well, so when I was publicly asked about my opinion on this last week, and I've been vocal about it. It's nothing personal against Andrew. I personally like him. I've known him for well over 20 years. But the funny thing is I have received almost no negative feedback on this. And like, I think back to like when I had staff that ran my Twitter account. My buddy Matt Wolf had it, ran it during the 2015 campaign. He works for Premier Kenney now. And he said, we could tweet out a picture of a cat hanging onto a rope saying, "Hang on, it's Friday." And you would still get people that's like, go fuck yourself, Jenni Byrne. Like I've had people respond and say, "I hope you get cancer, you stupid. See you next Tuesday," and die. Like and that's for like pushing out something on like Michael Ignatieff's going to put in a Netflix tax. So it's been surprising to me at very little response. And the only response that I get from people is, "Well, let's just wait till the convention." And to which I say, "Do you think he can beat Justin Trudeau?" And I have yet to have one person answer. I'm sure when this goes public, I'll be deluged with people that will send stuff in. But I have not had anyone that can actually answer that question or will say, "Yes, I think that Andrew Scheer in a year can beat Justin Trudeau."
I think it's an important thing for people out there to understand about political parties. And Jenny's been making, and I'm going to come to you on this. You can know a leader well. A leader can have been a good party person. A leader can have worked the party well. A leader can have a policy direction that you're comfortable with and believe in. A leader can be a substantial person that impresses you. But if that person doesn't look like they're going to win an election, they don't fulfill the essential characteristic of political party leadership. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, of course that's right. I mean, that is the fundamental mission. I think one of the things that's interesting about contemporary politics is that it's worth asking ourselves whether we now have moved to a default position where it's one and out. Like if you don't win, you don't stay. Because I think it's been since Harper that a party leader was able to lose an election, of the Conservatives or Liberals at least, lose an election and then survive on and fight again, much less fight again and win.
But that everyone keeps saying this convention thing. I think it depends. To your point, it has to look like whether they can win. Like Joe Clark was prime minister for 9 months, and the Liberals came back and won a majority. Tim Hudak won seats in 2011. He picked up a slight seats, and then the Liberals won a majority. I don't think it's as easy as everyone deserves 2 kicks at the can.
No. Sorry, you're misreading me. Yeah. I was making an observation, and I don't think it is definitive, but it feels like maybe that's the trend, that the speed and pace and urgency and demands of our contemporary political points of view are that you've got to demonstrate that you can win, and you probably won't get a second kick at the can. And I'm not even sure that that's crazy. I mean, if you look back on it, it's like, what would the Conservatives was Robert Mannion going to win the third time around? I mean, maybe they should have had a little bit of that back then instead of just taking loss after loss after loss. When it comes to Scheer, I just think it's an interesting question. Is that the default position now? In the pace at which politics operates now, if you can't demonstrate immediately that if you don't win, you must be able to win, then that's that. And I think it is a fundamental test. There's nothing about Andrew Scheer that inspires confidence if you're a conservative. I assume that he can do better in the next one. You look at it and say all of the conditions for success were on tap. And yeah, he started from a place where expectations were not that he could knock Justin Trudeau off. And yes, he won the popular vote, all those things. But those are relative tests as opposed to the fundamental absolute test of whether or not you win. And I don't imagine he's going to do better next time.
Well, and a lot of people I've spoken to have said that wasn't just the election, it's been what's happened since the election.
What a fuck show it's been for the past month.
There's been very little communication with party members. In fact, and Andrew hasn't done as much reach out to, from what I've told, to certain members of caucus or what have you. I think the appointment of Leona Elaslav, I would say her name wrong, as deputy leader really had a lot of people in the last part of the week puzzled.
Can you just stop and explain that to us? How on earth, after you lose an election, you're facing rearguard revolt in your own party. How on earth could you select someone who's been a member of the party for 1 year?
905 woman.
Well,
or nobody else would take it. One of those two.
No. This was deliberate. Other people would have taken it. I think she's in the 905. She's a woman. I think the weird thing is that, to Scott's point, she's been a party member for a year, and so it's great that she came into the fold, but that doesn't mean she has to have a leadership position. And especially at a time when he is facing the leadership challenges that he is, I would have put my most ardent supporter in there. And if it's another guy from the prairies, then perfect. But I would assume that you'd want someone in that position that can reach out to caucus, can go to DSMs, can go on the stump for you, that can go and
can strong arm people. And can say, hey, we're going to have discipline in this. If you're not on board, then you're not on board.
And so she can't do any of that because she has no history in our party. And frankly, what he's done to her is actually unfair because he has probably prevented or really slowed down any integration into the Conservatives.
Well, and she got caught up in that thorny Irish question, which has been screwing people up for years.
The Troubles. She wandered into the Troubles.
Shall Andrew Scheer march in the Orangeman Parade?
So, how do you tell that he can't win again? What is the judgment that people look at about that? So, in my recollection of Clark in 82, 83, is people said, okay, he screwed up the Trudeau thing, and we think that Turner's coming to replace Trudeau now, and we don't think that Clark can beat Turner going forward. So they made that decision that he was unelectable based on the previous election and what they thought was coming. Turner survived because he didn't get blamed for the 84 election. Most Liberals thought that was coming after 16 years of government, and he happened to be the sap that was there to take the beating. I don't have a different view about Scheer's electability today than I did 6 months ago. He's the same guy with the same skill set. Anybody that thought that he could win 6 months ago, what's changed?
Well, what's changed is we've had an election.
Right.
We had an election where in the areas we needed to win, Quebec and Ontario, we actually went down in votes. And it was a very challenging election for Andrew. But I don't think it matters. At this point, how I look at things, I don't think it matters why people think he's unelectable. Everyone has a different opinion. If you were to talk to... No, but if you talk...
What a fortunate position. Everyone can agree I'm shit. They just maybe disagree over why exactly I'm shit.
Well, no, but if you talk to Quebecers, they'll say his position on abortion was what did us in. Personally, I don't disagree. I don't agree with that. You'll talk to some people that his, opposition to gay marriage, when it's so mainstream now within the country, including within the party, is a reason. It could be policies. It just doesn't matter. Fundamentally, people just don't think he can win the election.
Okay. The reason I was asking is because in the other circumstances that I think about, it's always been a relative measure, not an absolute measure. Mm-hmm. So in the Conservative Party in the early 80s, people said not just that Clark couldn't win, but we have a more likely winner on tap, and that's Brian Mulroney, who can potentially deliver Quebec for us. Most of these leadership, most times, there is an heir apparent
but
when this is going on, and there is no obvious heir apparent.
There isn't. That is the thing. This is
not about Chrétien or Martin or Turner
that makes
or
it so
Mulroney.
much more damning.
But it's not. But this is more like. In 2002, when Stockwell Day was going through his leadership challenges, there was no heir apparent there. There was no, like some people might have said Stephen Harper's name. There was none. But you had in its way how history comes back. Mark Strahl, the party whip and a big supporter of Andrew, his dad quit caucus and was a leader of the DRC, the Democratic Reform Caucus, that led the charge on Stock's leadership. There was no heir apparent there, but also the difference is I lived through that. It was a civil war within our party because Stock had a significant number of supporters. You had the majority of caucus. You had a lot of riding presidents. I remember there was an AGM in Calgary Southwest, which had been Preston Manning's seat. And Ezra Levant and others led the charge to take over that riding association from the people that had been running it for Manning for years. That was a proxy for Stockwell Day's leadership. So I don't think...
he was a stockaholic. Remember that?
I do. And I love Stock. He went on to be a fantastic minister and got 35% in the subsequent leadership race that we had in 2002. So this has nothing to do with anyone organizing for a particular campaign.
Okay, but not to kick the living shit right out of the guy because it seems unfair and there almost is no other
Why is it unfair?
Argument. Well, just because there's no other. I mean, like,
Well, and actually I'd like to get onto it because it's not like I'm the only one sitting around that has ever spoken about the current leader of their party.
We've been involved in the point I wanted to make, though.
I've been hugely outspoken in favor of an existing leader against a review in the Mr. Turner situation, and I've been a complete agitator for a leadership change.
Yes, I know.
At the the end of the 1990s.
But we all have.
2000s.
I was a huge supporter of Stephen Harper. He got 84% in the 2005 leadership review at our convention in Montreal. Stephen Harper, Montreal.
I was
after
there.
An election.
I was there handing out buttons and trying to be a pain in the ass. The point I just wanted to make is that yes, we can go. The Stockwell Day precedent escaped my memory. It's a good one. But by and large, David's point is correct, which is it's very unusual to not have an heir apparent. That is a component of a leadership review and leadership dump process. And in some ways, and I think in almost every way, it's more damning because it's such a harsh, unfiltered personal judgment on this guy. It is your party saying, in the aisle between you and don't know, right? Don't know looks pretty fucking good to me, okay? Right. That's how condemning we are of you. And so it is a harsh personal judgment, and it makes you wonder what will it take to secure the outcome you want, which is, Jenni, that he moves on before putting the party through this. Like, is it 30 caucus members signing a letter saying, Merry Christmas, Andrew, please piss off? Is it a delegation of party seniors? Like, what? There are 2 or 3 conventions that are usually employed to try to force a sitting leader out. What would happen that might have that effect on him? Because this debate's happening in public,
let me just add
and
one
he's
bit
holding his line.
Let me just add one bit of context to that, which is quite shocking. You've raised it. One of the things that makes this so sad is there seem to be no significant senior party members who are loyalists of his. I do not see the other side rising to this fight at all. Mr. Clark had the support of most of the establishment members of the Progressive Conservative Party to keep his leadership. John Turner had the support of most of the establishment members of the Liberal Party to keep his leadership. This looks more like Dion or Ignatieff, where after the election,
Mulcair.
it's like or Mulcair, where like everybody just scatters and says, "You, buddy, you're on your own. I don't want to be even close to that." So in that context, I don't even know how he could try to hang on to April. What would he think April would be like if he did? Like, who's on his campaign? Who's on his side?
Well, he's got caucus supporters. Chris Workington was out last week. Chris is a good guy. I've known him for a long time. Senator Denise Batters.
We're talking about people on the margins of the party here, right? The prospective cabinet of the Conservative Party is not there for him right now.
He has had very little vocal
What about
support.
party infrastructure? Because he is the sitting leader, has he established those sinews? Like, does he control riding associations that would give him an organizational advantage?
I don't know the full extent. I don't know. I don't know what the full extent is. I would say what is unique about this is that a lot of the people that think that it's better for the party for Andrew to step down now as opposed to put the party through the next 5 months. It's as I said, it's very organic. It's not an organization. It's people that just genuinely feel that way.
The horrifying irony is that the longer he fights, the weaker he looks. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't actually make him look stronger. He looks as weak as day-old tea. And I think that's a fundamental takeaway, right? The guy just comes off as weak. Weak.
What did Robert Urback call him, boiled celery?
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. I didn't even know you boiled celery. But, and I don't know how you get it from under that.
Right. So... one of the ways that you can win these things, if you're a leader, hold on to your leadership in a leadership review, is to make somebody else the enemy, to make it about somebody else other than you, to pivot it. That was quite successfully done in the Turner exercise in 1986 because Keith Davey and Mark Lalonde and some other people like them came out against Mr. Turner. And then it didn't just become about whether or not you wanted Turner. It became about whether or not you wanted to go back to the people who'd run the party for the last 20 years under Mr. Trudeau. And so then it became a generational change within the party thing. And Turner came to symbolize that generational change, which helped him. So he would have had a more difficult time had not those old Trudeau people raised up their heads. Scheer is trying to do that, not to put too fine a point on it. I see Scheer deliberately trying to do that with what he calls the consultant class, the mouths for hire.
Right. Going after Corey.
Yeah. Going after Corey and presumably now you. Do you worry that could be possibly successful, that he could galvanize support against sort of an ancien regime type of people?
Well,
we don't want the Jennies back in charge.
Well, and I have no interest in being back. This has nothing to do with other than I have spent my entire adult life working for the conservative movement, and I do not want to see us living through what the Canadian Alliance went through again, which was 8 months of infighting to end up exactly where people expected it to be, where Stockwell Day there was going to be a leadership race, and Stockwell Day was not the leader. As I said, I have had very little negative feedback in terms of my comments, but this isn't about me. Like this is about Andrew. So
yeah, I know.
We'll see how he goes. Tonight is the Conservative Christmas party in Ottawa, I'm told. So we'll see what the chattering out of that is. But if going after people like me or consultants within the party or people that are speaking out and by the way, I gave heads up to people around Andrew that if I was asked what I was going to be saying, so it was not going to be a surprise to them.
Right. So you're a polite assassin.
No, but
kidding.
if he thinks that I'm the problem, then he still has a problem acknowledging as to what is happening within the party. It means that he is out of touch with what is being said by activists on the ground.
Absolutely.
But to your point,
and the last thing I want to say is I've been where you are, by the way, just to be clear. I mean, this is not, I don't mean to be picking on you. After Mr. Dion lost the 2008 election, I have no ill will toward Mr. Dion. In fact, I think he's been a great servant and member of the Liberal Party. And I think he's a high intellect. I think he would have brought a lot to the job, but it was evident after watching him in the 2008 election that he wasn't going to be able to run a competitive election campaign and that he couldn't win. And that there was no point in going through a lengthy leadership process. Yeah. I mean, I was one of those people that was urging Mr. Dion right after 2008 to step down, just as you were doing, and in the same constructive,
and I was in the same
frankly, spirit.
And listen, I'm assuming that members of caucus are hearing from their members, from their riding presidents about what they think, and I'm sure they're probably having private conversations with Andrew, and if not, they should be. That is the responsibility of caucus members, because right now I'm not sure he fully comprehends what the level of conversation is happening across the country. It's and I don't know who the people around him, but it kind of goes back to the same problem that I think he had. I think it was October 17th, the day that we did the live taping of the Herle Burly at the pilot, when he said on the John Moore show, we're going to win a majority. Yeah. Well, he obviously had been told that, but for anyone that was knocking on doors across the country, especially here in Ontario, in the 905, in the breadbasket of seats that we need to win government, it was evident that was not the case.
You know, David, your point about having a target, having a fight, and you say, well, he's, building up a narrative about the consultant class. My criticism goes back to the weakness. I don't think he's waging that war hard enough. Like, if I was working with him, I would be like, let's get a deputy right now who is going to be the axe swinger. Let's name Corey. Let's name Jenni. Let's go hard on this stuff. Let's question their motives. Let's try to make people feel uncomfortable about being aligned with those people and those motives. And I know I'm talking about you in the third person, Jenni, but I would go hard at it, and I would use party figures, particularly elected. I would go hard at it. And I don't see a commitment to that strategy. It's kind of half-assery, and half-assery gets you exactly nowhere.
Well, last night, for example, I'm just going to end with this because it's, as I said, I like Andrew. I care about the party more than I care about any individual. Is that there was a campaign debrief last night, and what was reported on the news is that there was no caucus in attendance for the candidates, like the candidate portion, which I think very weird because in this region, you've got your new deputy leader, you have others, and there was no caucus members that showed up to the campaign debrief yesterday.
Mm-hmm. I think the other argument, by the way, to have a leadership in their party is because before this Scheer thing blew up, there was a brief mini news cycle of people talking about, most notably our friend Dennis Matthews, talking about how do we expand the base of the Conservative Party just a little bit. Yep. Like, how do we raise our ceiling from what seems to be 40 to maybe 45 or closer to 50 so that we've got more accessible voters? How do we tweak our model so that we can be more attractive to more people? That kind of and people are saying, well, where does climate fit into that, and where does social conservatism fit into that? Those kinds of things are actually best thought through and reconciled in a leadership exercise.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's how parties come to grips with those kinds of challenges.
Yes. Right. Is there a risk, Jenni, that you could end up with the worst of all possible worlds, though? That is, those sorts of debates, let's assume that Andrew Scheer at some point is felled, and that the party does have that debate. But is there a risk that, just like Andrew Scheer actually emerged victorious because of the Brad Trost and that kind of stuff, is there a risk that you end up in a situation where all of this happens and an even more unpalatable social conservative ends up winning? Or is the party going to say, we just won't permit that to happen? Is there?
Who knows?
Okay.
Who knows?
Well, on that note, because whoever does know in politics, Jenni, Scott, thank you for joining us again this week. Lots of fun. And we will be back in 2 weeks for the year-end wrap-up. Awesome. And we'll have a speech from the throne to talk about. Boy, that will be dynamite, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going to begin the podcast by reciting it in full.
Well,
government wishes.
Well, and I'll just say, I think this one will actually be one to hopefully watch, because normally they're mind-numbing and what have you. Always remember the things that you screw up, like, announcing that you're going to have a gender-neutral national anthem like we did at one point. But it will be interesting because people are going to be watching for things like pipelines and TMX and what have you.
I agree with that. It's a chance to send a tone and maybe get noticed a little more than your typical throne speech.
Okay. With that, I'm now chastened, Jenni, and I will take it more seriously this week.
These are an important part of the parliamentary tradition, and you are wrong to dismiss it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. I want to thank Jenni and Scott once again for their insights to today's show. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, for their assistance in putting together this podcast. This was, as always, recorded at the Orange Lounge on Queen West in Toronto, recorded and engineered by Metal Donkersgood, and produced by Jill Engelman. Thanks for listening. Until next time. I'm done whether they say so or not.